Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here live, as always, with Tom and Kevin. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I had not really watched any college basketball yet this year, and I have my opinion on regular season college basketball has not changed at all. It is still, what it lacks for in interest, it makes up with lack of any importance at all of any individual game. So it's impossible to say whether it's bad or good.
That's your opinion, Tom. November basketball is the most important basketball there is. Kevin, how are you doing?
Doing well, just waiting for the show to start and this game to end. We haven't seen Tom Izzo stomp around enough, and week 3, I think, is always the week that they pull this and drop it in the middle of 2 basketball games, and it never goes off on time. And I've refrained from drinking a beer yet, so I'm getting a little angry.
Well, Michigan State is down to one timeout, and they're also down 11 points. So that should help our chances of getting this show started right on time at 9 p.m. ish. So we'll see. So we will see the rankings, and then as always, I'll jump off on the call. Tom and Kevin will take the show over, and I don't know what goes on. Frankly, I don't want to know, but then I'll come back, tell you what the committee said, and then we'll call it a night because it's going to be like 2 a.m. So, Tom, I think Washington should jump Florida State this week. Washington was number 5 last week. Florida State number 4 last week. Washington beats Utah 35-28. Number 18 Utah. Florida State beats Miami 27-20. I think it's time to jump Washington and start rewarding the Pac-12 for real rather than just, kind of like a cursory type of thing.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think, you've got Washington has, I think, the best win, a better win than what Florida State has, right? Because Florida State's best win is what? LSU, and LSU keeps losing. So I frankly would have been okay with that a week ago just because and frankly, deep down, I don't even think Washington's the best team in the Pac-12. I think Oregon's the best team in the Pac-12, but Washington beat them, so you got to kind of respect that. And I think that is a situation that will resolve itself in the Pac-12 championship game. But for now, yeah, I would be 100% on board with Washington jumping Florida State, and I think there may be some jumping higher in the rankings too.
Yeah, Kevin, are you expecting Ohio State? You were correct last week. Everybody else in the world was wrong. Everybody else was saying Ohio State was going to fall to number 2. You were like, no, you people are idiots. Ohio State's clearly number 1. They've played the best. They've got the best schedule. The people who cover them are the best. I think Ohio State is going to stay number 1. And we thought Georgia was going to jump them. Do you think Ohio State stays number 1 this week?
I do not. I think that I know I'm just I'd rather be right than popular. Generally, I'm neither. But
I was going to say, you're usually 0 for 2 on that. So
I think that with the second game against a ranked team, and I think we're not going to see Ole Miss drop a whole heck of a lot, even though they got beat by 11 million points. I think this will be the week that they move them up. And then I'm assuming as part of the SEC, Georgia is playing air this week. Ohio State plays Minnesota. That won't make really any difference. And then we will see what happens the week after the game. And then on the flip side of that, once you get into championship week, if Ohio State is in the Big Ten championship, they will be playing air from the Big Ten West, while Georgia will have to play somebody from the SEC West, presumably Alabama, and that'll be a much better game than what Ohio State will have. So we know that Ohio State needed to win by a lot more as the season was going on to bank points, because it's always going to be rigged a little bit for the SEC.
Georgia is actually at Tennessee this weekend, which
is still
a little bit better than Samford, but not necessarily all that much better than Samford. this time of year. So we are now. Oh my gosh, this game is ending. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and it is
behind you. Then apparently,
over. 74-65. Duke wins a memorable game. Tom Izzo falls to his customary 1-2 to start the season. I believe that is the 13th year in a row that Michigan State starts 1-2, playing a very difficult schedule. Tom, let me take a moment. And we were without Kevin for one of our live shows, and we were like, gosh, we need Kevin around. It would be a hell of a lot easier if Kevin was around to do some of this stuff. So, Kevin, thank you for being here. Is it easier, Tom? Are things easier, or were we, are we wrong?
There's a lot less for me to do when Kevin's here. I don't have to try to. That was the Jim Harbaugh Jim Harbaugh suspension show last Friday, where the news broke in the middle of the show and Kevin was not here to produce. He hopped on remote from Cleveland. But yes, I had to put all the graphics and stuff together live as I was also trying to speak somewhat coherently on air, which, any and all of that is always a struggle for me. So trying to do it all at once, definitely a real challenge. Someone was asking us earlier about the backgrounds. This is what happens when basketball goes on way too long and we have too much time before the show. So we all have late, 70s, 80s, maybe late 80s TV show sets as our backgrounds today. And I've seen many incorrect guesses in the people have gotten them correct, but there were many incorrect guesses in the chat on some of these.
I would like to
obviously on the set of Alf.
Ooh, that would be a good one. There's obviously endless options we could go with. Eventually, I'll do like the Silver Spoons because I just want the train in the background, which of course everybody knows that reference. Silver Spoons, the long-running 3 seasons back in 1983 to 85. So we are almost ready for the rankings. I would like to see them get this and just crank it out because the teleconference is supposed to start at 9:45, but they're still doing some post-game.
Hang on, we've got to have an out-of-focus shot of Duke's coach walking down the tunnel for some reason.
Emmy reasons.
Do we have to have a term break here, or do they just roll right into it? Looks like they're going to roll right into it. That's
There
for
we
you,
go.
Ed.
Oh, there's Ward Manuel. He's back on set.
Damn, this 8-second delay.
Hey, boo.
JM, you're right.
Texas.
Aaron Gray spoke on Silver Spoons, but she was also spoke on which sci-fi show was it again? Was she on Battlestar Galactica?
Buck Rogers?
Buck Rogers, that's it, yeah.
Beady. So we'll see what happens here. Just looking, I wrote down all of the rankings last week. The top or the bottom 19 through 25 all won last week. And the top 8 teams all won last week. Then in the middle, it was like 500 basically in terms of wins and losses. So there are gonna be some teams moving up. I'm interested to see if this is the week Bama moves past Texas. And you hold out because Texas got the win. But with Alabama looking as good as they did against Kentucky, an SEC opponent, 49-21, the offense is cooking. Jalen Milroe is cooking. Texas is kind of doing what they're doing right now. They had 29-26 win against TCU. Quinn Ewers is coming back, but I think if the committee was honest with themselves, they'd probably say, well, if we put these teams on a neutral field, we're going to go ahead and take Alabama. So I'm wondering if this is the week they go ahead and move them and stop having Texas be Alabama's ceiling.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I think that almost regardless, if Texas, I don't know that it matters, I guess, right now, because if Alabama wins out, they are already locked in to play Georgia in the SEC championship game. So if Alabama wins out, they're going to finish ahead of Texas regardless, even if Texas wins out, because you will have the SEC champion bump. and plus Georgia or Alabama would have a win over Georgia at that point. So I don't know that it functionally matters, and I don't think there's any way either of those teams is getting in with a loss, with another loss at this point. They both have one. So that's one that I don't think matters as much as the Washington Florida State one we talked about earlier, where both of those teams, could win out, and then that very, very much matters.
Have you guys been paying attention to this Big 12 thing, the tiebreaker situation? It is getting more confused. I don't know that anybody actually knows what the tiebreaker is, and the conference is having to meet again to figure it exactly out because of all of the shenanigans with the scheduling going on and the records and the schedules. And it will probably sort itself out, but it could get messy there.
It could get very messy, and Oklahoma State is at the middle of it. And Oklahoma State, if you want to know why it's getting messy, it's because Oklahoma State has beaten a bunch of good teams and just gotten throttled by a bunch of bad teams. They have had the weirdest. I mean, please open up another tab and go through Oklahoma State's schedule and explain it to me. They got murdered into 1,000 little pieces by South Alabama. Mm-hmm. They got killed by Iowa State. They got destroyed. Who killed them last week? There was someone that killed
UCF.
UCF murdered them last week. It was 45-3 or something. Mm-hmm. And then in between, they won a bunch of games. They beat Oklahoma. None of this makes any sense. They beat Kansas
State.
Yeah, and I don't think they played Texas. So it's just an absolutely bizarre season for them. And there's just, we talk all the time about, well, you can't really expect a bunch of 18 to 22-year-old guys to, play, be consistent every week and, no fluctuations or whatever. That is the living embodiment of that Oklahoma State team.
Yeah, because right now there are 4 teams tied at 5-2 in conference play in the Big 12, and Texas at 6-1, and it is a mess. And Oklahoma State has tiebreakers on some of these teams, but because of the large number of the 5-2 teams, they don't have tiebreakers on all of them. But it may come down to who has the best record against all of the teams in that group of tied teams. So there's still plenty to come there. And here come the rankings, Tom. You are on a delay, is that correct?
Here come the rankings. No, here come the rankings. Okay. 25, Kansas. 24, Tulane. 23, Oklahoma State, down 8 spots. 22, Utah, down 4 spots. 21, Kansas State, up 4 spots. So Kansas down 9 spots, Tulane down 1, Oklahoma State down 8, Utah down 4. Oof. And now we're on to the 20s. 20, North Carolina up 4 spots, Notre Dame up 1 spot to 19, Tennessee down 5 spots to 18, Arizona up 4 spots to 17, Iowa up 6 spots to 16. That's, not that it's really going to matter, but, that kind of ensures that Iowa is going to be a top 25 win for whoever comes out of the Big Ten East, unless something really crazy happens. Boy, they are doing this on hyperspeed. Number 15, LSU up 4 spots. Number 14, Oklahoma up 3 spots. Number 13, Ole Miss down 4 spots. Number 12, Penn State down only 2 spots. That's good for Ohio State and Michigan. Number 11, Oregon State up 1 spot.
Oh, somebody disagrees. I was wondering if Oregon State might jump Louisville, but that answer is no. Let's just see where Louisville is here.
Oregon State has, is going to have an opportunity to make a real statement coming up. They get Oregon in a couple weeks. Who do they have this week? They've got someone else this week before that. But, yeah, they've got, Oregon State's legit. Jonathan Smith has done an incredible job with that program. Number 10, Louisville up 1 spot. So, that's going to be, assuming they don't lose to Kentucky, that's going to be a good win for Florida State. But it's not as good as what whoever comes out of the Pac-12, what they're going to get. Number 9 is Missouri. They are up 5 spots. Boy, you could have. I would not have had Missouri in the top 10 at this point of the season. At the beginning of the year, I would not have given that remotely decent odds. That's pretty surprising. Eli Drinkwitz has done a nice job with that team. They've done the loaded up with wide receivers and slinging around thing, and it has worked.
Oregon State hosting Washington this weekend.
Oh, that's right. So yes, Oregon State has Washington and Oregon back to back. So that could go very well or very poorly.
That's a 7:30 kick on ABC. That'll be the most watched Oregon State game since Jaquiz Rogers against USC.
Number 8, Alabama, 9-1, and number 8 in the country.
And that's where they were last week. So this will be Texas.
Which, boy, Texas, I mean, they've been close. They have just kind of kept slight. Texas and Alabama have had kind of similar seasons where I think everyone saw them, saw them with games that they could lose several weeks in a row, and they've kind of just sort of slid through, and it hasn't been decisive, but they've gotten through a bunch of close games, and here they are, top 8 and 9-1, and in a position where if you win your conference, you're probably in.
Texas won 31-24 at Houston 4 games ago, then a 35-6 win against BYU, then 33-30 at home against Kansas State, and then 29-26 at TCU. So they have been playing with fire, but getting away with it. And so the committee's like, well, we know what their basement and their ceiling is right now, and they're tied to Alabama, and you can't put them again ahead of Oregon right now just because of the way Oregon is playing. And Oregon's ceiling is Washington just because they lost to Washington. So there's like no room for for maybe Texas. It's kind of like the rooms from Being John Malkovich. If you ever saw like the shrunken, you can't move anywhere in there. And that's kind of what the whole Oregon, Texas, Alabama thing is right now.
And then one of them's going to lose and get dumped by the side of the New Jersey Turnpike.
We've never seen the movie.
That all checks out.
So they'll probably go to commercial now for the top 6.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions we want to touch on here?
I've been fighting with the dang rankings, so I've not been looking at
okay. I thought you were going to say the Michigan
All
fans.
right. Well, let's start with our buddy Omar. Is Tom's background from Different Strokes? Yes. Yes, it is. What you talking about, Omar? No commercial break. We are punching up our top
Dr.
6.
Jones.
Number 6, Oregon, and that is not a surprise. That's where they've been. Which the next question is, what Tony said off the top of the show is number 5 going to be number 5 Washington. Nope, they are just not going to move Florida State down. I would probably take Washington or Oregon over Florida State on a neutral field. Don't you think?
Yes.
Yep, I would agree with that.
I don't know the ACC this year at all whatsoever.
I don't know what Florida State has done to earn just this, other than they didn't like Washington's close wins a few weeks back, but what's Florida State's been doing kind of the same thing.
Right. Florida State's big signature win is over LSU, and that has gotten less impressive with time. And then they have a 2-point win over Boston College, an overtime win over Clemson. And, last week was a 7-point win over Miami, and the week before that, 24-7 over Pitt. So number 6, Oregon, number 5, Washington, number 4, Florida State, number 3, Michigan. That's interesting. I thought there was a possibility Michigan might jump to the number 2 spot, with Ohio State falling 2 spots. So now we're down to just Georgia and Ohio State for the top 2.
With them only playing their only game so far this year? I mean...
Well, Ohio State's best win, by Michigan beating Penn State, Ohio State's best win took a loss. Ohio State's second best win was Notre Dame. They took a loss a week earlier. So, and Ohio State has looked better.
Michigan's second best win was what, Rutgers?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yes. But Michigan has, if you want to do the eye test or, game control, whatever phrase the committee wants to put on it this year.
There you go.
You'd probably go Michigan over Ohio State. Ohio State down to number 2. Georgia jumps them to number 1. Not a big surprise there, I don't think. Ohio State did what they needed to do last week against a perfectly terrible, Michigan State team, but Georgia blasted Ole Miss, and they only moved down Ole Miss four spots, I think, after losing 52-17. This is, I think, a little bit of a variation on the old theory that you look at what the committee does from 21 to 25, and that kind of tells you what the committee wants to do at the top. Ole Miss losing 52-17 and only dropping 4 spots.
Yeah,
That's kind of the committee saying like, well, we think Georgia's amazing, and also we don't want to drop Georgia too much we don't want to drop Ole Miss too much, because then if they lose again, they might fall out of the rankings, and then that would hurt what we want to do at the top.
and Ole Miss at this point, there are 2 losses. Alabama and Georgia. The Alabama loss was 2 touchdowns. Their best win right now, LSU, which was a shootout, and also Tulane for Ole Miss. So keeping them in there. In terms of Ohio State dropping, is this the biggest crime against a team from the Big Ten we've seen this year? It's frustrating to see the Ohio State attacked this way by the committee without due process.
Would you consider them America's team, scrappy underdogs?
Well, I think you have to look at it this way. When they're being not just disrespected, but harmed, I would say irreparably. Like, you cannot fix what the committee has done this way. And I think you see a rallying around from not just America, Tom, but also Canada, which is
like America, but just not quite as much.
Right. And also
interesting.
Go ahead.
Interesting graphic here on the broadcast as they're laying out, key wins for Ohio State versus Georgia, and strength of record, this is the ESPN analytics metric. Strength of record: Ohio State first in the nation, Georgia 7th. Strength of schedule: Ohio State 39th, Georgia 78th. It is November 14th. Georgia plays in the Southeastern Conference, and their strength of schedule is 78th in the country. Do you know how many Power 5 teams there are?
130.
I believe
No.
it's 68 now. I believe it's 68.
Yeah,
It used to be
Power 5,
65 or 66, and I think it's
Yeah.
68 now, but it is fewer than 78. There are non-power teams with a stronger strength of schedule than the Georgia Bulldogs. They have looked very good. Stipulated the last 2 weeks. They beat Missouri. They beat Mississippi. Yes, stipulated. There are non-Power 5 teams with a stronger strength of schedule than the Georgia Bulldogs. It is November 14th.
That's ridiculous.
Well,
Super chat.
They play in the
Kevin.
crappy half of the SEC. So, I mean, honestly, the only team that was supposed to be on their schedule realistically in their division was Tennessee, and Tennessee is still watching Missouri score points on them at this point.
Well,
And it's worth mentioning, every time we do talk about Georgia and their strength of schedule, it is worth mentioning they had Oklahoma on the schedule this year, and that got scrapped because of the conference realignment thing. So that's worth mentioning. And then this time next year, when we're talking about the fact that Ohio State doesn't play a power conference team out of conference, that's because Washington, that series got scrapped for largely the same reasons as the Georgia-Oklahoma series. So that's just sort of worth mentioning there.
the super chat from Omar Austin, based on our backgrounds, Tom, of course, with the different strokes background, Omar Austin suggests that we start calling you Tom the Gooch, or would that make, I would guess that maybe that makes me, with the married with children background, Grandmaster G.
No. I was going to say it makes you Marcy Darcy.
Why does he keep calling me a chicken? I'm not a chicken.
Super chat from Mike Farino. Interesting that Iowa is so high up. And here's the thing. Iowa is terrible, unwatchable garbage, but they keep winning football games. So, at some point that means something. They're 8-2. They have, I'll pull up their remaining games, but I know they finish with
Nebraska.
They finish with Nebraska, and they have Illinois this weekend. So you would think Illinois has kind of fallen off of the face of the earth, and Nebraska still needs a win to get bowl eligible, so they will definitely not get a win there. So Iowa's probably 10-2, and that's you're getting to the point where with other teams losing, Iowa could be like a borderline top 10 team by the time you get to the conference championship game, which, I mean, okay, but that's going to end up being a quality win for whoever is in the whoever comes out of the Big Ten East. Interesting defensive comparison here on the screen for Ohio State versus Georgia. Georgia you think of as the defense dominant, Kirby Smart, defensive whiz. Ohio State better in opponent points per game, 9.9 to 15.6. Yards per game, 262 to 289. Yards per play, 4.1 to 4.7. Drive score percentage, 17% to 23%. Touchdown percentage, 8% to 17%. Ohio State top 5 in FBS in all of those categories. So that's interesting.
That's playing a better schedule. That's playing better competition than Georgia as well. Put those numbers. So we'll see what Boo has to say when obviously he's talking now. He was talking a little bit about Georgia and Ohio State. He'll say more here in a little bit. Iowa jumps from 22 to 16. Two teams ahead of them lost, and Notre Dame was off, and yet they still jumped that many. And they also jumped Arizona. Arizona got a win at Colorado. So this, I think, is just a kind of a reward to the Big Ten type of thing. And this is like them saying, we told you we liked Rutgers, and Iowa beat Rutgers 22-0. So let's just continue to prop up Iowa. Super chat from Mike Farino. Didn't Penn State run more plays than Iowa had yards? Feel like that should prevent you from being inside the top 20. I do not disagree.
And just in that game, Iowa had 76 yards of total offense, and Penn State had, 97 plays. 97 plays to 76 yards of offense.
I will say this, Boo Corrigan, when he has talked about Iowa, says that they have great defense, great special teams, and that's two of the three parts of the game. Now,
and a great personality.
Oh, exactly. Okay, Meatloaf. 2 of the 3 ain't bad.
It's not bad. It's just not pleasing to look at. The playoff predictor that ESPN has up there right now, Michigan, the top playoff prediction possibility at 67%. I think Ohio State was at 63 at number 3. That means something. That
means you can safely ignore that metric, because the odds that 2 Big Ten teams get in here, what would you say the odds that 2 Big Ten teams get into the field this year would be? Would you say it's 2 and 3? If not, then that metric is garbage, and you should stop paying attention to it.
Super chat from yes, yeah. Super chat from Omar Austin. How is Florida State ahead of Washington at this point? Florida State looks very pedestrian, in my opinion. I'm with you, and I wonder what the Tom, you would pull up the analytics to tell us what the line would be on that sort of game, but I don't know that anybody's really rushing out to pick Florida State in that one right now. And in terms of what Florida State has done of late, 27-20 last week against Maryland, 24-7 against Pitt. They trailed in that one, but they obviously won big. Duke, they blew them out by 18, blew out Wake Forest. So they're making hay against some pretty bad competition. So I guess I can understand why the committee doesn't want to move them down at this point, because they just keep doing what they're supposed to be doing. They'll probably say Miami is a rivalry game, so you throw that in there in the mix, and you understand why maybe you don't win by more than, why you don't cover, wink wink. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's okay, but I thought and now you look, there's no Utah in the rankings, so Utah went from 18 to unranked for losing.
Utah's
They
ranked.
are. They are. They're near the bottom.
22. They're 22. Sorry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they dropped 4 spots for losing by 7 at Washington, the number 5 team. This will be if Washington beats Oregon State this week, and Florida State beats North Alabama this week, maybe then they finally move Washington ahead of Florida State. But we'll see. I'm going to go ahead and jump out, so I'll let you guys take it.
Wave at me
And-
when you're ready to come back on.
And I pulled up the college football nerds model for both Oregon against Florida State and Washington against Florida State. They have Florida State beating Washington by like 1.7 points. It's 30.4 to 28.7. Offense having the advantage on both teams. For both teams, Washington like a plus 7% advantage running the ball, plus 17% passing the ball. Florida State a plus 13% running the ball, plus 10% passing the ball. Very, very close game. What's interesting to me though, Oregon 31.4 to 23.6. Oregon with a substantial advantage just about everywhere. Essentially, they're thinking Oregon just runs Florida State over, more or less. Passing a little bit better, rushing, basically a yard and a half per carry better. So that's Florida State is on that playoff predictor graphic. They were the second most likely team to make the playoff. That has a lot more to do, I think, with who Florida State would potentially have to play between now and Selection Sunday, which is no one. So North Alabama, and then Florida, and then Louisville.
Chunk and Louisville, yeah.
Yeah. So, no one, and Florida's been terrible this year, and then Louisville's been unimpressive. I know Louisville is one loss, and Louisville's a top 10 team right now, but is there a scenario where Louisville makes the playoff? I mean, it's like technically they're alive, but I don't think, I think they would be hard-pressed to put Louisville in over, the scenario where a second Big Ten team makes it or a second SEC team makes it is probably the one where Louisville wins the Big 12 and Texas gets upset or Louisville wins the ACC and Texas gets upset in the Big 12 or something like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to rewind to their playoff predictor. What they have Louisville at 1% along with Oklahoma. So I mean, and those, they needed two more teams to round the board out at 10. Omar Austin Super Chat, does anyone have a name that doesn't fit a face like Boo Corrigan? I don't disagree there. I'm assuming that is not his given name. I'm assuming that's not on his birth certificate. I don't know how you get a nickname like Boo, but more power to you.
Super chat from Mike Farino. Between Oregon, Washington, and FSU, Oregon is the best team, which is why FSU is in the playoff spot. Committee probably expects Oregon to beat Washington in the rematch. And that's I definitely agree that Oregon is the best of those three teams. That I don't think there's much question right now. And I would agree that I would expect Oregon to beat Washington. I think then you just get into a situation where, okay, Oregon is 2 spots behind Florida State right now. So if Florida State beats Louisville and Oregon beats Washington, assuming they both win out essentially, then you're asking Oregon to jump 2 spots to get ahead of FSU, even though I think pretty universally people would agree that, if you asked Ohio State fans, who do you not want to play right now, I think they would probably mostly choose Oregon, and you take your chances with FSU, and that's a whole separate part of this conversation. We're probably a little far out to start speculating on potential matchups. If Ohio State wins out, if Georgia wins out, sometimes the 2-3 matchup is a much better matchup than the 1-4 matchup just because of the teams involved. If you could avoid Oregon in round 1, if you could avoid Georgia in round 1, if it's Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, and Florida State or something like that or even Texas, I think of all those teams, I think Florida State's the one just about everyone would choose to face if they had an option. Do you agree?
Yeah, they're like to use college World Series lexicon. They're 0-2 in barbecue. They're just happy to be there to get the gift bag and via con Dios at that point. So yeah, there always seems to be that one team. It always seems to be 3 teams and a leftover that's going to be in the playoff. And if you're able to sit there and do a little matchmaking on your own and say we're going to set this up in the best way, you really want to try and avoid Oregon more than anybody, in my opinion. Because if you're Ohio State, because Ohio State is a team that's built on defense. Oregon is a team that is built on offense. Is Ohio State's offense high-powered enough to punish a defense that can be a little leaky? Well, this isn't Michigan State's defense, so I don't know necessarily about that. Can Ohio State stay up in a track meet with Oregon? That might be difficult too. I think Ohio State is built better to compete with a Georgia than it is with with an Oregon.
Yeah, I think Oregon people have in their heads like, oh, it's the cute little team and they run tempo and they, everyone's sort of in their heads, it's still the Chip Kelly era, and it is very much not the Chip Kelly era. They are not screwing around out there. Dan Lanning is building an SEC team in the Northwest. And, if he sticks around there and, his name, you've sort of heard his name bandied about with regard to like Texas A&M and that kind of stuff. I assume he's not jumping yet because he's in a good spot and he's about to go to the Big Ten. And
quotes today coming out saying he's got unfinished business, but we also know that vote confidence and I'm not looking at any job mean nothing. So that's not me. That's not me saying that he is moving to one of these other jobs. That's just to say, don't look at the man behind the curtain, because there's no track record that's necessarily going to be the case.
Exactly. Super chat from Omar Austin. New podcast title, The Gooch and Noon. I think it's got to be Noon and the Gooch, don't you think?
I think it needs to be. I was going to say the one that they use on Family Guy, and then I just said it again. I'm like, no, I'm probably not going to say it. But yeah, I think Noon and the Gooch works a little bit better. I don't need top billing per se, but it just has a better flow to it. Whoops. I'm punching the stuff through. Stop it.
Kevin and I keep clicking on something at the same time. And what we're clicking on is a super chat from Jeff Hines. Living overseas, it's nice to have this channel to watch to keep up with my team. Thanks, guys. Go Bucks. Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate it. We're, I don't know where you are living overseas right now, but we're a little later than normal. So maybe this is a more convenient timetable or time zone for you than we typically are. Mark Fetters says, Ohio State or Michigan make it in playoff with loss. There's not a question mark at the end of that, but I certainly don't think that's a declarative statement that Ohio State or Michigan makes it with, even
Ohio
if they
State
lose.
Would have a better shot, and that shot is quite small. If Michigan loses, Michigan's only win was Penn State.
Yeah.
So they're donezo at that point. And and that's not even talking about investigations and everything else. They're donezo at that point. If Ohio State loses there, its losses to Michigan, but it's a pretty stacked field of contenders at that point, and not having that extra data point, and we know when you lose matters and everything else, I think Ohio State would be hard pressed to make up that ground. So if this is a question, I would say Ohio State, we're talking a pretty small fraction, and for Michigan, it's a 0 to me.
And for Ohio State to make it in that case, you assume the SEC's got one team in, so Georgia beats Alabama. So Georgia's in, Alabama's out. That's one. Michigan's in that scenario, so that's 2. You would need, some combination of, Oregon State could really help Ohio State's chances under this scenario if they can beat either Oregon or Washington the next couple weeks. Maybe Oregon State beats Washington, and then Oregon beats Oregon, and Oregon beats Washington, and then you have a 2-loss Pac-12 champion. Maybe then Texas losing to whoever comes out of the steaming pile of 2-loss teams in that conference. If Texas loses the Big 12 championship game, that would help. If Louisville beats Florida, I think you've got a decent argument that Ohio State has, if Louisville beats Florida State, you at least have an argument that Ohio State has a better resume than Louisville does at that point. But you would have to have 2 of those 3 things happen. The Pac-12 blows up, the Texas loses in the Big 12, or Florida State loses in the ACC. You need 2 of those 3 things to happen. None of them are overly likely. One of them entirely possible, but you would need a lot of help. And Ohio State got a lot of help last year, so it's not out of the realm of possibility, but you would need a lot of help. Super chat from Omar Austin. Your backgrounds are making me nostalgic, fellas. Gun to your head. Alf or Mork and Mindy? Hashtag Gordon Shumway for life. Your thoughts, Kevin?
My thought on that, I like Mork and Mindy better because I felt that Robin Williams obviously carried that show rather than a Muppet. That's not saying that Alf did not fit a time and fit a place. I think that the eating cats joke got pretty old after a while. I mean, it's just like Garfield hates Mondays and loves lasagna. I mean, okay, we get it, but pre-clean and sober Robin Williams was pretty good, and the stories about them having to have 5 or 6 different translators making sure that Robin Williams wasn't swearing in other languages when he was speaking from, his Orcish or whatever, whatever the language from Orc was, Shazbot. That's the direction I would go, Mork and Mindy.
Mork and Mindy is a little before my time. Alf was right in my wheelhouse. I had an Alf lunchbox in like 3rd or 4th grade. So Alf was right in my wheelhouse. That's one of those shows. You know how there's like certain movies that you watch when you're a kid and you're like, oh, it was a great movie. You go back and watch it. It's like, oh, this is terrible. Oh, this is awful. I had that with Jewel of the Nile. I had that experience recently. I remember Jewel of the Nile very fondly, the sequel to Romancing the Stone. I remembered that very, very fondly and went back and watched it recently. It was like, oh, no, that's not good at all. I have a feeling if you went back and watched Alf, it would probably not hold up all that well. But
no, probably not. You get stuck sometimes watching Facebook reels and things, and I got stuck watching something about how Alf ruined the life of the youngest kid who was on it because of this reason and that reason, and life goes wonderful for child stars as it is, and fortunately, he's still with us according to the reel. I don't know when it was built, but yeah, I don't think Alf would really hold on. But then again, in this world of reboots and everything else, I'm surprised we don't have that one yet. So there are many other shows that I would rather see them reboot, but then again, not, because they would probably replace the lead with an aardvark.
Jeff Hines says he's in Roatan Island, Honduras. I bet the weather is warmer there than it is here. Super chat from Mike Farino. Really needed Utah or Miami to finish the upset last week for a loss to get Ohio State in. Yeah, Utah could have done it last week against Washington. Didn't. Miami could have done it last week against Florida State and didn't. Almost. Not quite.
Well, we're waiting for that week of chaos, and it hasn't necessarily happened yet. We talk every year that there's a concern of what happens if there are 8 undefeated teams. Well, the math does not lead itself into there being 8 undefeated teams, but generally, by the time we get to the end of the season, there's 2, 1, none, and we haven't quite reached that point yet. We know, obviously, the Big Ten will take care of itself. One team will certainly lose on the last Saturday of November, and that will be that. And I'm not expecting to see any sort of upsets with Ohio State facing Minnesota or with the team up north facing Maryland. I think both teams go into that 11-0. But yeah, some upsets along the way outside of Ohio State's world would be good for the discussions and everything else. But Ohio State knows what's in front of it. Win the next 3. Winning the next 2 gets you the chance to play in the third one. Winning the next 3, and honestly, you're no worse than 2. You're no worse than 2 in the playoff.
Yeah, and then at that point, it's a matter of what else happens around you, because we have seen Ohio State go into that championship week in 2019 as the number 1 team. They took care of business against Wisconsin, but it was closer than you might have expected because they were coming off of back-to-back games against Penn State and Michigan, and LSU really pulled away, and then got the first round bye against a Lincoln Riley Oklahoma team in the first round, and Ohio State had to deal with Clemson in a absolute classic game in the Fiesta Bowl. Quanta Redtail says, chaos for you. Bama over Georgia SEC Finals. Oregon or Washington wins Pac-12. FSU wins ACC. Ohio State undefeated. What do you think? Yeah, I mean, that's entirely possible. If Ohio State's unbeaten, they're into that scenario, regardless. I think Alabama has to be in at that point. I mean,
Yeah.
has to be in. Like I'm saying that in terms of like, what is the committee going to do? But you're a one-loss SEC champion. You just beat Georgia. They're going to be in. Florida State wins the ACC. They're in if they're undefeated, and then whoever wins the Pac-12 probably in. The only issue is the conference you don't have in this scenario is Texas. What happens? What happens in the Big 12 if Texas wins? Someone has to get left out, and I don't think Texas is the team that's getting left out, because then Texas has a head-to-head win over Alabama, and the committee has shown that they're willing to overlook that in the past. But that certainly would be one of the best wins of anyone for Texas to have that over Alabama. I mean, on the road and not super close either. I think in that scenario, I mean, if it's me, again, I'm leaving out Florida State, unbeaten or not. I think Florida State is the weak link there, but
Well, I
don't know.
Pac-12. I mean, there are two different flavors there. You could have an undefeated Pac-12 champion, or you could have a one-loss Pac-12 champion. And as much as we all love the Pac-12 and the committee loves the Pac-12 with the depth in there, you're getting to the point where you could be taking a couple of one-loss champions over an undefeated Power 5 champion. And again, all rules don't matter. This is the last year of the 14 playoff. We reshuffle the cards and re-rack them and start all over with the 12-team playoff, and grudges will be short-lived at that point because a lot more teams are going to be getting in and having some of that sweet life of CFP games.
Yeah, and to your point, there's you don't need to worry about any kind of precedent there, and what people think of that is going to probably depend on which team are they playing. Because if you're the number one team and you're and it's either number 4 or number 4 Oregon or number 4 Florida State, if you're the number one team, you're saying, listen, they're undefeated. You gotta let Florida State in. Come on. And if you are, if you're not, then you might want to see Oregon in there to, who's more likely to knock off that number one team. Super chat from Wingman Ted. I Dream of Jeannie or Bewitched. Do you have a strong opinion here?
I do. They were not exactly the same time run, if I remember. I think Bewitched was a little after I Dream of Jeannie. I watched Bewitched. I grew up in a pretty strict household, and I Dream of Jeannie, she showed her midriff, and we don't need to get little Kevy all too excited and overstimulated with that. So I wasn't like banned from watching I Dream of Jeannie, but Bewitched was a little bit more wholesome, I guess, for a show about witchcraft. So I definitely Bewitched. I remember it being on the afternoon wheel after you got out of cartoons. You would have Bewitched, and you would have what else? I mean, on one channel there's Chips and Emergency, which was about the firefighters, and on the other channel, I think it was like a double dose of Bewitched. I think they really liked Bewitched, so I think we got an hour of it, just so we could see what wacky things that they would get into, and what Endora would do to Darren.
First of all, which Darren? That's the real question. Which Darren are we talking here?
York.
Dick Sargent or Dick York? Because that makes all the difference, I think. Second of all, you mentioned Chips. I get to tell one of I think my single favorite April Fool's Day story of all time. And that was, I was working at this is 10 years ago or something now. And I was working at a production company, and it happened to be April 1st. And someone came in and said, Eric Estrada is in the lobby and is here to talk to you about, a project. And we kind of went, yeah, April 1st, yeah, I got it. And and like 2 minutes later, she popped her head back in, like, no, Eric Estrada's down in the lobby. And it's like, no, we get it. It's a joke. But no, Eric Estrada was down in the lobby to talk about a project. So yes, so that's Tony. That's the story of how I met Eric Estrada on April Fool's Day. How is Boo Corrigan?
Can you hear me? Am I good?
Yeah.
Am I-
Yeah. we're
Yes.
I'm sad I didn't hear that story. Maybe I'm sure I've heard that story before. There's no way you have met Eric Estrada and not mentioned it on at least 4 of our drives, Rutgers or Maryland or elsewhere. How is Boo? Boo is good. Boo is old Boo's a sweetheart, as we all know. So the questions mainly were about Georgia moving to number 1. The answer there, interestingly, he started with the win over Missouri, which was a couple of weeks ago, and the fact that Missouri just did what they did to Tennessee, which was like a 36-7 win, and of course the 52-17 win over Ole Miss. So I don't know if you guys know this. Each week they start with a blank sheet when they do their rankings.
What?
It's completely blank. There's no letterhead on it. If you put a letterhead on it, that's a lie against humanity because that is not a blank sheet. So it's just a blank sheet. And so then with this blank sheet, there is new information. The new information basically being what Missouri is doing. And then, of course, the win over Ole Miss. So that is why they went to number 1. The question was asked what was the conversation between Ohio State and Michigan between 2 and 3? And obviously the Notre Dame win and the Penn State win are still quality, and they share that Penn State win with Michigan, but Michigan has no other wins. Ohio State is 5-0 against teams with winning records, an explosive offense. Michigan is dominating teams, but the body of work that Ohio State has kept them at number 2. Heather Dinich asked about how they weigh the head-to-head between Texas and Alabama when Alabama keeps getting better. And I said, yeah, it's 2 really good teams. Jalen Milroe keeps getting better, but the importance of the head-to-head is there. And just like as conference championships are there, that's something they take into consideration. That's not able to be taken into consideration yet, but they are debating those 2 teams. But now that Quinn Ewers is back, they'll continue to look at it, but head-to-head continues to win out. In terms of Washington versus Florida State, this is mainly it's a Washington defensive issue, and also they are still holding the close games against Arizona State and Stanford against them. 2 teams, as Boo said, I think have won a combined 6 games this year. So the committee is still pretty angry about that, and they're not ready to buy in. And maybe they will at some point. Quality wins have to start like overtaking the close wins. I wonder what the committee would think of the 2002 Ohio State team, for instance. Would they have gone into the final weekend like ranked 7th or something like that? So those are the main points. Pretty even week in terms of nobody accusing them of anything. And actually, there's no questions about Michigan in terms of, hey, anything about the Jim Harbaugh thing, because the answer continues to be, as long as we can rank them, as long as they're eligible for the postseason, we will rank them. And so that's where we are right now.
All right, let's get the super chat from Jeff Hines. Popeye drive-through here, and Tony, here is Honduras. Never gets your order right, just like when I lived in Columbus. I feel you guys are worried about the Michigan game. I'm excited. Big win.
Well, it's good to know that when franchises go global, they always have like different things. Like you can go to Japan and get like a Big Mac that's made of octopus, but at least they keep some of the traditions traditional, and which would be going somewhere else and getting the wrong order at Popeyes. In terms of being worried, like it's not something to be concerned or be worried about. It's just a thing where Ohio State is going to have a very difficult time winning at Michigan. That's true of anybody, and I don't think it's any big kind of statement there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that after watching Michigan play Penn State, I would probably say I increased my likelihood of Ohio State winning in Ann Arbor after watching Michigan play Penn State, just because they haven't really had to show much of anything at any point this season, but it was not overwhelming against Penn State, and Penn State, yeah, they were absolutely dominant against Penn State's offense, but Penn State's offense is lacking a functional quarterback, a play caller who knows what he's doing, and wide receivers and a tight end, and Ohio State has all of those things. So I don't know how much I take from the Penn State game in terms of, well, Michigan dominated Penn State, so therefore that's exactly what's going to happen against Ohio State. Like, I don't think I think that.
The transitive property is absolute.
That is one thing the committee always says. One, we don't project. Two, we love the transitive property.
Super chat from Omar Austin. Boo Corrigan sounds like a dude that put way too much sugar in the Kool-Aid, and it's absolutely lovely.
Yeah, I don't even know how to go with this one. Boo seems like a nice dude. Though I would say probably sweet tea is my thing. Maybe some sweet tea instead of the Kool-Aid.
He's a sweet tea guy. Maybe he puts a little nip of something in there too, or whatever.
Maybe some lemon. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes, some lemon for sure.
Nice slice of lemon. Where are we on the start and all of that? Are we?
Everything that's in there basically have been super chats at this point. Okay. I know we were definitely trying to keep this at about an hour. We're at 56 minutes right now. So
there was one.
Go ahead.
There was one thing that I saw earlier that I thought was interesting, and I'm scrolling back to see if I can find it. But it was essentially, it's amazing how little has to happen for this year to be exactly what 2014 was. Not necessarily in exactly the same order, but the four teams from the first college football playoffs, the first four-team college football playoff, Alabama, Florida State, Oregon, Ohio State. All four of those teams still very much in the running this year. If Alabama beats Georgia, if Florida State wins out, Ohio State wins out, Oregon wins out, you could very well, especially if Texas loses, that's your four. And it's probably it's different matchups probably than it was the first time. But I mean, that if that happens, it's probably number 1 Ohio State, number 2 Florida State, number 3 Bama, I guess, and number 4
they beat
Oregon.
Georgia.
Yeah, and again, this is if that's the 4 and I'm Ohio State, I say, can you make number 2 number 4? Because I would much rather play number 2 Florida State than number 4 Oregon, or even number 3 Alabama. That feels like, it always feels like the SEC team somehow always gets the first round bye, and that would be another one where number 3 Alabama somehow has the easiest matchup.
And you think that's somehow going to be changed? Like that sets up perfectly for them. In fact, Tom, I could see Georgia moving down to 3 in order to get that matchup. Let's see here. Do we want to wrap up? Are we good?
Yeah, let's wrap up. I guarantee you there's not going to be any shortage of shows coming up here over the next several days and through the holiday and everything else. So, let's let everybody get to it, and I can crack open that first beer and go back and listen to the show and maybe start working on tail of the tape. I mean, where's Minnesota ranked?
Not appearing in your picture.
Holy cow! Toledo is coming back on.
Yes,
Green.
It was 28. It
was 28-7, 28-10.
All right, I have to go get my remote. Let's go. I got to watch that one. I've been giving Dave Briggs a hard time about the game.
Hey Tom, how are things going, Tom?
No, pause in the middle of the question. Try it again.
No, let's just go. Kevin is gone. All right. If you have not yet, please come find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Now, we are this close to Michigan week, so we're going to definitely ramp it up even more than we normally do. So we invite you to join us there. And, of course, feel free to continue finding us here on youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Hitting a thumbs up on this, subscribing to the channel is a great way to support us here as well. So thank you all for tuning in on this Tuesday night, and we'll see you guys later.